While I was stationed overseas serving my country, my wife persuaded my elderly father to alter our family estate plan. My name is Daniel Cooper, 39 years old and 15 years in the United States Navy as a systems intelligence officer. I'd spent the last 10 months at a naval base in the Middle East, analyzing data transmissions and dreaming about Washington's evergreen forests. For days after I landed back in Seattle, I discovered the documents in my father's study drawer. The family trust my grandfather had established before his passing completely restructured with Rachel, my wife of 7 years, listed as the primary trustee. My father, William, had been relegated to secondary beneficiary status. The document was dated 5 months into my deployment. I sat in my grandfather's home office holding the papers, reading each line carefully twice. The waterfront property had been in our family for 4 generations. The land it occupied, 12 acres of the most stunning coastline in the Pacific Northwest, was intended to remain in the family name indefinitely. That was what my grandfather had wished. "Everything okay here?" Rachel appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that relaxed posture of hers. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she wore the sapphire earrings I'd sent her for our anniversary 3 years ago. I returned the papers to the folder. "Just reviewing some documents." "Your dad's finances were in complete disarray," she said, her tone light and supportive. "I organized everything while you were away. Someone needed to intervene." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I've been managing all his expenses, handling the property taxes," Rachel continued. "The trust needed updating." Your father completely agreed. My father sat in the living room watching a baseball game with the volume too high, 79 years old and beginning to repeat himself more frequently. During my last few video calls with him from overseas, he'd seemed confused about what month it was. "Thanks for keeping things organized," I said finally. "I need some time to readjust to being home." Rachel smiled. "Of course. Take all the time you need." That night, I sat on the back deck long after Rachel had gone to bed. I watched the silhouettes of tall fir trees against the night sky and contemplated what my grandfather would have done. A career naval officer himself, he taught me that the most forceful person in the room is rarely the most formidable. The next morning, I kissed Rachel goodbye as she left for her position at Westlake Financial Services. I told her I was going to spend the day with Dad. She didn't notice me slip the trust documents into my jacket pocket. I met Rachel 8 years ago at a fundraising event near Naval Station Everett when I was stationed there. She was intelligent, driven, and possessed a talent for making people feel valued. We were married within 14 months. She and my father connected well from the beginning, something I appreciated, especially after my grandfather passed away 6 years ago. Grandfather had been the responsible one, the planner. When he was diagnosed with heart disease, he ensured everything was in order. "Look after your father," he told me on his final day. "The house and land stay in the family. That's non-negotiable." The trust he established was supposedly unbreakable. Or so I believed. For years, Rachel had complained about living in a condominium while sitting on all that valuable waterfront at your father's place. "We could build our own house there," she'd suggested repeatedly. I always declined. The property was intended for my father to enjoy his remaining years in peace. My deployments have become more frequent over the past 4 years. Each time I returned, I noticed subtle changes. My father seemed increasingly dependent on Rachel. My wife had assumed control of his checkbook, his medication schedule, his medical appointments. "He's becoming forgetful," Rachel would tell me. "He needs the help, Daniel." It made sense, until it didn't. On my second day back home, I took my father to lunch alone. Just the 2 of us. We went to Harborview, the small seafood restaurant he and my grandfather used to frequent every Saturday after their morning boat ride. "How are you really doing, Dad?" I asked after we ordered. He smiled, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped his water. "Oh, managing. Rachel has been so helpful." "I saw the trust was changed," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He looked puzzled. "Was it the papers you signed a few months back about the house and the property?" Dad frowned. "Rachel brings me so many papers to sign, bills and such. She explains them, but—" He trailed off. "I get confused sometimes." My stomach tightened. "What kind of papers?" "Insurance. Banking documents. She says it's to protect the assets while you're away, that you'd want her to manage the finances." Dad leaned forward. "Did I do something wrong, Daniel?" I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. No, Dad, you didn't do anything wrong. On the drive home, Dad dozed in the passenger seat. I made a phone call to an old Navy colleague who'd become an attorney. I kept my voice low as I explained the situation. Don't confront her yet, he advised. We need to determine the full extent of this. 3 days later, I found the bank statements. I hadn't been specifically searching for them. I was in my father's bedroom, helping him organize old photographs when he mentioned wanting to show me the nice statement Rachel had brought over. What statement is that, Dad? From the bank. She said the investments were performing well. I found the folder in his bedside table. Inside were statements from 3 different accounts I'd never seen before. 2 were recently opened joint accounts between Rachel and my father with withdrawal privileges for Rachel. The 3rd was a brokerage account where the family's long-term investments, nearly $450,000 my grandfather had accumulated over decades, had been transferred. My hands went cold as I examined the pages. There it was in black and white. $92,000 withdrawn over the past 7 months. Money that had disappeared in increments of $7,000 to $18,000 at a time. The withdrawal slips all bore my father's shaky signature. I sat on the edge of the bed, papers spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. This wasn't opportunism. This was methodical. Calculated. My father stood in the doorway, watching me with concerned eyes. Are the numbers good? Rachel says not to worry about the details. I gathered the statements carefully and smiled at him. Everything's fine, Dad. I'm just catching up. That night, Rachel suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate my return. We went to an upscale restaurant overlooking the bay where she ordered champagne. She wore a new dress I hadn't seen before and jewelry that looked expensive. You seem preoccupied, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Still adjusting, I nodded. Just getting my bearings. I've been thinking, she continued, eyes bright with anticipation. Now that you're home, we should discuss building on your father's land. I've already spoken with an architect. Just preliminary conversations. I took a sip of water. And what would happen to Dad? We take care of him, of course. But that house is too large for him now. There's a beautiful assisted living community near my office. Very exclusive. That's when I knew the trust, the accounts, the land. It had all been a calculated strategy. She'd been planning this for years, waiting for the right opportunity when I was far away and my father was at his most vulnerable. I didn't confront her, didn't raise my voice. I smiled and nodded appropriately as she described her vision for our future home on my family's land. I think I need a few weeks to readjust, I told her, get back into civilian rhythm before making any significant decisions. She looked disappointed but nodded. Of course. Take your time. I excused myself to the restroom and called my attorney friend from the hallway. I need everything you've got on elder financial abuse and trust invalidation, I whispered. And I need it immediately. Walking back to the table, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. The weight of betrayal was heavy, but clarity had a way of focusing the mind. 1 week after my discovery, I scheduled an appointment with Benjamin Morris, an estate attorney in Tacoma who specialized in elder law. I drove the 40 miles alone, telling Rachel I was meeting with old Navy friends. Your father was likely coerced, Benjamin said after reviewing the documents. His office was lined with legal volumes and smelled of leather and pine. But proving it won't be simple. Did he have a cognitive assessment around the time these documents were signed? Not that I'm aware of. I leaned forward in my chair. But he's been forgetting things. Names, dates. He repeats questions. Benjamin nodded. We'll need a geriatric specialist to evaluate his current condition. If he's showing signs of cognitive decline now, we can argue it was present when he signed. I left his office with a plan. The next day, I took my father to Dr. Margaret Chen, who confirmed what I suspected, early-stage dementia, likely developing over the past year or more. Has anyone else noticed these symptoms? Dr. Chen asked. My wife, I replied. She's been managing my father's affairs while I was deployed. Dr. Chen frowned slightly. And she never sought medical evaluation? Apparently not. Armed with medical documentation, I decided to approach Rachel directly, not with accusations, but with questions. We sat in the kitchen that evening after my father had gone to bed. I took Dad to see a specialist today, I began. He's showing signs of dementia. Rachel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. That's unfortunate, but not surprising. I've noticed his memory issues for some time. Before or after he signed the trust amendment? Her eyes narrowed slightly. What are you implying, Daniel? Just trying to establish a timeline for the doctors. I've done nothing but help your father while you were gone, she said, voice rising slightly. Who do you think has been here? Day after day? Certainly not you. I nodded. You're right, and I appreciate everything you've done. I'm just concerned about some financial decisions that were made. What financial decisions? Her tone sharpened. The trust amendments. The new joint accounts. The withdrawals. Those were for your father's care, she snapped. And household expenses. Everything is documented. I'd like to see those documents. Rachel stood abruptly. I don't appreciate being interrogated, Daniel. Not after everything I've sacrificed. Your father agreed to all of it. A man with dementia, I said quietly. He wasn't diagnosed then. Rachel grabbed her keys from the counter. I need some air. We'll discuss this when you're thinking more clearly. She left, the door slamming behind her. I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the old house settle around me. The next morning, I received a call from my bank. There had been an attempt to access my personal savings account, an account Rachel's name wasn't on. The attempt had failed due to incorrect password entries. That same afternoon, I found a certified letter addressed to my father. It was from Evergreen Shores Assisted Living confirming his upcoming residency. The move-in date was scheduled for the following month. The contract awaiting my father's signature was dated 4 days after I had returned home. When I showed my father the letter, he looked bewildered. I don't remember this place. Did I agree to move? Rachel says you did, I replied, watching his face. He shook his head slowly. I don't want to leave my home, Daniel. I promised your grandfather I'd stay here. That night, I changed the passwords on all my accounts and placed a security freeze on my credit. Then I called Benjamin Morris again. It's worse than we thought, I told him, and I think she knows I'm investigating. 2 days after confronting Rachel, I drove to the county clerk's office. I needed to see the original trust amendment for myself, not the copy Rachel had in the house, but the official recorded document. The clerk, a silver-haired woman named Patricia, pulled the file for me. Cooper Family Trust, she confirmed, sliding the folder across the counter. I opened it and immediately noticed something that made my blood run cold. The notary stamp. The document had been notarized by someone named Michelle Wilson. Do you know this notary? I asked Patricia. She adjusted her glasses and examined the stamp. Michelle? Of course. She's worked in the Burnham Law Office for years. Burnham Law, the same firm where Rachel's college roommate, Stephanie Burnham, was a partner. A connection Rachel had never mentioned when discussing the trust changes. I thanked Patricia and drove straight to Burnham Law. The receptionist informed me that Stephanie was in court, but I could speak with her associate, Michelle Wilson. Michelle appeared nervous when I introduced myself. You're Rachel's husband, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Is there something I can help you with? You notarized a trust amendment for my father 7 months ago. She nodded. I did. Everything was in order. Was my father alone when he signed the document? Michelle hesitated. I don't recall specifically. Let me help you recall, I said quietly. Was my wife present during the signing? I really can't discuss. My father has documented dementia. The amendment stripped him of primary control of assets he's held for decades. And somehow it all happened while I was deployed overseas. Her face paled. Mr. Cooper, I think you should speak with Stephanie about this. I intend to. But first, I'd like to know if you actually witnessed my father sign those papers. Or if you just stamped a document Rachel brought to you. She stood abruptly. I think this conversation is over. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Stephanie Burnham. Daniel, she said, her voice tense. We need to talk. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Stephanie looked immaculate in her business suit, but her eyes were troubled. Michelle told me about your visit, she began. I want to be clear that my firm takes notary standards very seriously. Did your firm draft the trust amendment? I asked. She sighed. No. Rachel brought the document already prepared. She said it had been drafted by your family attorney. With your knowledge. And my father? Was he present when it was notarized? Stephanie looked down at her coffee. No. Rachel explained that your father was ill and couldn't come in. Michelle improperly notarized it based on Rachel's assurance that your father had signed it willingly. That's illegal, I said flatly. It is, Stephanie met my eyes. And I've already contacted the State Bar Association to self-report the violation. Michelle has been suspended pending investigation. Why are you telling me this? Because I've known Rachel since college, and I never thought she'd. She trailed off. There's more, Daniel. Last year she asked me about liquidating property assets and transferring funds internationally. I assumed it was for a client of her financial firm. Now, I'm not so sure. My mind raced. International transfers, property liquidation, the assisted living contract. How long had she been planning this? Stephanie hesitated. There's one more thing you should know. 3 years ago, Rachel consulted me about divorce proceedings. She wanted to know how military pensions and benefits were divided, whether deployments affected spousal support calculations. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, right when my deployment schedule had intensified. Thank you for your honesty, I said finally. As I left the cafe, I called Benjamin Morris again. I need to move quickly, I told him. She's been working on this for years. I didn't confront Rachel with what I'd learned. Instead, I smiled through dinner that night as she talked about renovations she wanted to make to the house. I listened as she suggested selling some of the land to fund Dad's care. I nodded when she mentioned meeting with a financial advisor to streamline our investments. Meanwhile, I was building my case. Dr. Chen provided a detailed report on my father's cognitive state, including her professional opinion that the symptoms had been developing for at least 16 months. Benjamin Morris filed emergency motions to freeze all assets in the trust and the joint accounts Rachel had established. I hired a private investigator who documented Rachel's spending patterns, the designer clothes, the lunches with real estate developers, the meetings with a luxury home builder. He also uncovered something I hadn't expected: a separate apartment in Tacoma leased 7 months ago under her maiden name, Peterson. 10 days into my investigation, Benjamin called with news. The judge has granted our request for temporary guardianship of your father, he said, and we've secured a hearing date for next week to contest the trust amendment. That same day, I moved all of my personal possessions from the master bedroom into the guest room. When Rachel questioned me, I blamed sleeping problems from the deployment. I thrash around too much, I explained. I don't want to disturb you. The truth was, I couldn't stomach sleeping beside her anymore. 3 days before the hearing, I received a package from the private investigator. Inside was a flash drive containing financial records Rachel had tried to delete from her laptop, records showing transfers from my father's account to pay off Rachel's personal credit card debt. Over $55,000 gone in 7 months. That evening, Rachel approached me in the kitchen. We need to talk about your father, she said, voice gentle but firm. The assisted living facility needs an answer by Thursday. I looked up from my coffee. I'm not sure that's the right move for him. Rachel sighed dramatically. Daniel, be realistic. He can't live alone anymore, and we can't properly care for someone with dementia. We've managed so far. That's because I've been handling everything, she said, irritation edging into her voice. But it's not sustainable. The facility is top-notch, and the trust will cover the costs. The trust, I repeated. The one you had him sign while I was deployed. Something flashed in her eyes. Wariness, perhaps. Then it was gone, replaced by practiced concern. I did what needed to be done. Someone had to step up and make these decisions. I appreciate that, I said, my voice neutral, but I'd like to explore other options before moving him. Rachel's smile tightened. The deposit is non-refundable after Thursday. You made a deposit already? Of course. Good places have waiting lists. I put down $20,000 to secure his spot. She touched my arm. From his account, not ours. Don't worry. I nodded, filing away this new information. The next morning, I drove to the assisted living facility myself. The director confirmed the deposit but seemed confused when I asked about the waiting list. We don't currently have a waiting list, she told me. We have several units available immediately. When I asked about the deposit amount, she checked her records. It shows $7,000 here, she said. Paid by Rachel Peterson. $13,000 unaccounted for. Another piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, I finalized the last details with Benjamin. All evidence was compiled. All paperwork filed. The forensic accountant had completed her analysis of the financial records. Tomorrow was the hearing. I hadn't told Rachel about it. She would find out when the sheriff's deputy served her with papers in the morning. That night, I sat on the back deck again, looking at the old fir trees my grandfather had loved. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. When the sheriff's deputy knocked on our door at 7:30 a.m., Rachel was still in her robe. I watched from the hallway as she accepted the papers, her face transitioning from confusion to shock as she read them. "What is this?" she demanded, turning to me. "A court hearing today to invalidate the trust amendment," I said calmly, "and to address the financial irregularities." "Financial?" She stopped, her face flushing. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong." "The hearing is at 10 a.m., I continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Judge Whitman's courtroom. You should probably call your attorney." She stared at me, the papers trembling in her hand. "You've been planning this all this time, pretending everything was fine." "Learn from the best," I replied. We arrived separately at the courthouse, Rachel with a hastily assembled legal team from her firm, me with Benjamin Morris and my father, who sat beside me, looking small but determined. Judge Catherine Whitman, a stern woman in her 60s, wasted no time. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of amendments made to the Cooper Family Trust," she began. For the next 2 hours, Benjamin methodically presented our case. Dr. Chen testified about my father's cognitive state. The forensic accountant detailed the suspicious transfers. Stephanie Burnham confirmed the improper notarization. The private investigator presented evidence of the secret apartment and the discrepancies in the assisted living deposit. Throughout it all, Rachel sat rigid, whispering frantically to her attorneys. When it was her turn to testify, she attempted to paint herself as the devoted caretaker, stepping in when no one else would. "I've sacrificed my own career advancement to care for my father-in-law," she insisted. "Every financial decision was made with his best interests at heart." That's when Benjamin produced the smoking gun, recorded conversations between Rachel and various real estate developers discussing development plans for her property once the old man was moved out. Judge Whitman's face hardened as she listened to Rachel's voice, clear and calculating, planning to profit from my family's land. Judge Whitman's ruling was decisive and comprehensive. "The court finds clear and convincing evidence that William Cooper was not competent to execute the trust amendment," she declared. "Further, there is substantial evidence of undue influence and financial exploitation by Rachel Cooper." She ordered the trust restored to its original form, with additional provisions barring Rachel from serving as trustee or beneficiary in any capacity. All joint accounts were to be dissolved, with funds returned to my father's sole control. A full forensic audit was ordered to track and recover every missing dollar. Additionally, Judge Whitman concluded, "I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to elder financial abuse and fraud." Rachel didn't look at me as she left the courtroom. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I turned to my father, who squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Your grandfather would be proud," he whispered. 1 week later, I moved my father into the guest house on our property, a small cottage my grandfather had built years ago as his workshop. I hired a full-time nurse to help with his care, using funds recovered from Rachel's spending sprees. The divorce papers were filed the day after the hearing. Rachel didn't contest them. I learned later that she'd left Washington, heading for California, where her brother lived. The apartment in Tacoma was abandoned, the lease forfeited. She'd taken only what she could carry in 2 suitcases. Sometimes in the evenings, I still sit on the back deck watching the fir trees sway in the Pacific Northwest breeze. The land remains in the family name, just as my grandfather wanted. The trust is secure, with my younger sister Claire, who recently completed her MBA, serving as co-trustee alongside me. I don't spend much time thinking about Rachel anymore. Some betrayals cut too deep for anger to sustain. Instead, I focus on the good things: morning coffee with my father, weekend visits from old Navy friends, the simple peace of knowing that what was almost lost has been preserved. My grandfather used to say that a person's character isn't revealed by how fiercely they fight, but by how wisely. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, I finally understood what he meant.